It's one of those news stories, maybe the only one, that seems almost too big to cover. Climate change and the scientific consensus that the planet is almost at the point of no return. The evidence is overwhelming. The latest came just last week in that UN report, warning that roughly 1 million plant and animal species now face extinction. News outlets could cover climate change stories every day and still sell this story short. But they struggle to find the right way to cover the relentless onslaught of data that is newsworthy. Still, there are signs that things are changing. Corporate media, which have fed off natural disasters, covered floods and famines while shying away from larger causal issues, are now beginning to examine and link the global economic system to an issue that has brought us to the brink. Movements like the Extinction Rebellion and terms like the Green New Deal are trending, and for far longer than the standard 24-hour news cycle. Are these changes in coverage real? Will they last? Our starting point this week is the planet Earth.
Here, I've got an experiment for you. Safety glasses on.
Satire is at its most effective when it contains an element of truth. In this case, an inconvenient truth.
What I'm saying is the planet's on fire.
An American television personality, scientist Bill Nye, uses showmanship, props, and profanity to make his case on climate change. And a topic that, when covered conventionally, can struggle to attract clicks, quickly gets 4 million of them.
Safety glasses off.
Bill Nye clip is absolutely fantastic. On one level it was comedy, but on the other hand it was absolutely searingly concise in terms of the situation that we face. The planet is on fire at a scale, unimagined 20 years ago. Metaphorically, in every conceivable sense, we are destroying the oceans, the soil, the other species. The whole of life which supports our lives is being exponentially destroyed.
Climate science is very difficult to talk about. And you're talking about the 6th generation of climate science models coming up now with metadata and so on and so on. But I think this particular meme about a globe and the actor basically putting it on fire and basically saying we captured all of that in a very succinct way.
The climate crisis is a complex story to cover, but there's been a shift since the data has now grown so compelling you don't have to be a scientist to understand. There was the UN study from earlier this month warning that up to 1 million species, flora and fauna, could soon be extinct. A second UN body warned governments late last year they had 12 years to limit temperature rises to avoid a climate catastrophe.
A new report from the United Nations is painting a grim portrait of the state of our planet.
Both studies drew significant coverage, as did a recent wave of climate activism.
Hundreds of climate change activists marched towards Parliament. Their message: act now.
There were the school strikes in March, the brainchild of a 16-year-old Swede, Greta Thunberg, who became the face of the strikes and a focal point for the news media.
So student activist Greta Thunberg is with us now.
She joins me now from Stockholm, Sweden.
Thanks for joining us. You are an extraordinary young lady. Thank you very much for joining us.
The strikes went global, with more than 1 million students involved. And then there was the Extinction Rebellion, the street movement born in London that was tired of playing by the rules and being ignored by the media. Last month, it disrupted traffic for days. All kinds of news cameras showed up, but rather than focus on the cause of the protests, many of them could not resist dwelling on the effects.
The seemingly mostly middle-class eco-activist temper tantrum, known as Extinction Rebellion, came to London and shut down much of the city.
It's absolute madness that a bunch of protesters brings London, huge capital city, to a standstill.
Still, mirror protests took place in 27 other countries, and for a while, climate change news was everywhere.
It was interesting to watch the framing of Extinction Rebellion in the UK. I think a lot of the response was, these are just privileged protesters going out into the streets. Don't they have jobs to do?
You're a load of incompetent middle-class self-indulgent people who want to tell us how to live our lives.
Which I don't think is the most honest or, good faith framing on the part of the media.
And I wouldn't stand for anything else.
Jolly good.
A lot of folks who are coming into the streets are doing so because they recognize that climate change and, extinction crises pose a massive disruption to life as we know it.
What Extinction Rebellion has done, alongside obviously Greta Thunberg and the school strikes, I think it has changed the narrative around climate change. Even in the mainstream you hear a lot of people now talking about the climate emergency, the climate crisis. But certainly I think the narrative has moved on. Since Extinction Rebellion has stopped, that issue has now faded off the agenda again to a significant extent.
The challenge now for Extinction Rebellion in the next phase is, they've had quite an effective media strategy. I think the challenge for them going forward is that we're all going to get tired of, good-natured and good-humoured posters about climate change and about biodiversity loss. But that isn't going to remain on our screens forever. So what happens next?
If it was up to climate activists, the answer would be new emission laws around the world. No country produces more carbon per capita than the United States, and the climate change debate there is now centered on what's called the Green New Deal. Proposed by progressive Democrats in Congress, the Green New Deal aims to achieve net zero greenhouse gas emissions by the year 2030. It's ambitious, and with cost estimates in the range of $10 trillion, expensive. That's partly because it proposes sweeping structural changes to the American economy that go well beyond the energy sector. The Green New Deal has generated extensive coverage, much of it serious and thoughtful. But when the debate makes it onto Fox, the most widely watched news channel in the country, the focus is less about science and economics and more about competing political ideologies.
We have to be brutally honest and say that these ideas are really dangerous.
Yeah.
And
what you get from most of the media, certainly the right wing, the Foxes and all the rest of it, an implication that it's just totally unrealistic and unfeasible.
A Green New Deal will save the planet. In exchange, we just give up cars and airplanes and rebuild every structure in the United States.
And the problem in the media is that they're complicit with the way politicians frame any change as a change that is going to happen to the average taxpayer. When it comes to climate change, this is not about the average person, getting hit in the pocket. It's about those that have the most responsibility and the most, luxury and space to be able to make the changes without it affecting their lives too much. It's really about turning the lens back on them.
And the problem is the fact that we live in an economic system which is very deeply unsustainable, and that we sort of premise our notions of economic success on indefinite growth and growing the economy exponentially. The goal of an economy is to grow its GDP by 3% every year. That still presents a tremendous stress on the Earth's ecosystems. And that, I think, is the conversation that is very hard to have in the mainstream media, but that absolutely needs to be a central part of the conversation. Why not call into question sort of our fixation on economic growth as the only metric of well-being, which it's not a terribly good metric of well-being.
This is a globalized media model. It's very financialized. It's about media ratings. It's about what sells. It's highly sensationalized. But you're also beginning to see a more concerted effort to mainstream a climate focus. There is the issue of funding and resourcing, etc. But at least in that context, that shift is happening.
The climate change story is also being told on platforms in ways it hasn't been told before. Greenpeace has never been shy about getting its environmental message out. Last year, it added an investigative unit to examine the measurable effects of climate change and to dig into the corporate PR side of the story, journalistically documenting the money fossil fuel companies spend to lobby governments. And Netflix, which makes most of its money through fictional content, films, and TV series, recently added a climate change series fronted by David Attenborough. Attenborough is best known for making picture-rich wildlife documentaries at Britain's BBC. 6 months ago, he was criticized in The Guardian for missing the bigger picture. As one of the British paper's columnists put it, Attenborough and his team were telling a false story, creating a fairy tale world that persuades us all is well in the midst of an existential crisis.
And that led to David Attenborough, having been publicly called out in the media, then making with Netflix this incredibly powerful series called Our Planet that differs very significantly from his previous work.
For the first time in human history, the stability of nature can no longer be taken for granted.
Placing the wonders of nature alongside the catastrophe. And I think that combination is absolutely vital.